welcome all to the 100th, the centennial episode of the 706 podcast. I know many of you thought this day would never come, but here we are. I am your host for this magical journey. My name is Kirk. Why don't we go around and introduce ourselves? But you know the game. Why don't you go Tony, Anthony, and Connor?
Hey guys, this is Tony.
Anthony.
And I say with extra solemnity, Connor.
Yeah, we've actually dressed for the occasion. Anthony, Connor, and I are wearing tuxedos. Tony's actually naked, and it's kind of making me regret having the video function of the Zoom call, but we will push on anyways. Luckily, his camera is not zoomed in. So, folks, we really want to thank you first and foremost for your invaluable ears and your patronage. Not really, because we haven't made a dime off this, but I guess for your enthusiasm for this endeavor, which we started in a humble dorm room in New York City in the West Village. Was it 2015 or 2016? Why don't one of my resident historians clarify that?
I think it was 2015. I think it was fall.
December, November 2015, because we did it before Star Wars, The Force Awakens, but also before spring semester.
Well, thank you very much. They referenced the unofficial wiki for that, but folks, and thank you for constantly updating. Tony's criminal trial is still pending, so once we have news on that, you can update that. Jermaine, he's really great. So, folks, it's been 8 years, I guess. It's been 8 whole years, 100 episodes in 8 years. Things have changed so much. Around this time in 2015, Anthony, was kind of rather, derisive toward Master of None. Now he's received a cease and desist order from Aziz Ansari for his blog on the same subject. Tony was on page 123 of Infinite Jest. He's now on page 345. And Connor was unearthing a nationwide conspiracy about a tropical soft drink. What is it? Tropical Fantasy. They're actually about to buy X from Elon Musk for $45 billion. So I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same. But either way, we're very, very happy to have you along with us. We've done some amazing movies. It's really a testament to our canon that the first movie we did was Spice World, and the most recent film we did was Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. It's kind of 2 layers of saltine crackers, but in the middle, you got some filet mignon, some really nice shrimp scampi. So why don't we get into that a little bit? Why don't we reflect a little bit on those 99 episodes, actually more when you count our bonus episodes, and we'll go around just briefly. And thank you all for humoring us. This is a little self-indulgent, but let's go around and everybody can say their most favorite recommendation / I guess successful nomination from their co-hosts. Each of their three co-hosts over the past 49 episodes. So let's see. Let's try to do this in a kind of a concerted way. So let's go with all of the recommendations or all of the choices that we watched from Tony. So why don't you go first, Connor? Any Tony film jump out to you in the last half century?
Yes, obviously there's a lot of great Tony films. I think my Tony pick from the last 50 has got to be Jackie Brown. I know there's a lot that, like, obviously you can kind of see that coming and it's a great classic, but like I just think that was a very interesting pick for kind of a little bit of a standout in the Tarantino filmography. It definitely hit when we watched it together, and it was or watched it for this program. And I just love that movie. So I got to give it to Jackie Brown for Tony.
All right, Anthony?
Probably my favorite is going way back to the second half when we first started this part. And I think it might be 45 years, which is something I really, really has kind of grown on me. I don't remember what I wrote it. I don't remember what I said 100%, but it's one of the movies I've thought about positively over time. And I have to say, though, the most unforgettable film, but definitely not necessarily a recommendation, would be Oasis.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Anthony, not very hip to the disability rights movement. I know you've kind of panned that film. You weren't very satisfied with it. I don't know. I think everybody deserves a chance to be seen on screen, but Anthony prefers, his Humphrey Bogarts and his Gene Tierneys and his Ingrid Bergmans. So we can't all be those. But anyways, for me, I would say it would have to be, it's not necessarily the movie itself, but just kind of the discussion. Most recently, we did Harmonium. That was a really, that was a chewy, kind of sinewy discussion and a really, really in-depth film that I think could have even been dragged on a little bit more in terms of the episode. So, Tony, any reflections on these choices?
Yeah, I mean, just before we started recording, Anthony said, "Whatever happened to Gary Cooper?" But no, I do like that you all picked different ones, and I do think that I've kind of gone back to my wheelhouse lately in terms of the kind of grim dark tone. But I think there's a nice diverse array of choices there. But other than that, not a lot to say.
All right, fair enough. So let's go to Connor. Connor has an interesting oeuvre here over the last 50 years, as in 50 films. But let's start with Tony. Tony, give us a Connor film that really jumps out to you.
It's tough because a lot of the Connor movies that I felt most positive about were movies I'd already seen, but I guess he'd already seen Jackie Brown, so I guess that's allowed. My Connor pick would probably be Wizard of Speed and Time. I think that movie is hilarious. I think it's a lot of fun. I think that's exactly what I love about this podcast, or these like little discoveries, or it's a great opportunity to bring up a movie that wouldn't really be in anyone else's canon but ours, or just this little weird gem that we can kind of mine, we can kind of examine in our way. So that movie was just an absolute blast, and I had a lot of fun discussing it with you guys. So it'd probably have to be that one.
Yeah, I do think of some of the hidden gems, like for me especially Titanic. Some other ones. I think I recommended The Godfather at one point, maybe not. But anyways, great choice, Anthony.
Yeah, I think this time we saw the whole oeuvre of Connor's taste: A Wizard of Speed and Time, Scooby Doo. We saw his Kagamushas, his Kurosawa phase. But I think the one I enjoyed a lot also is near the beginning of when we started the second half. It's a kind of traditional Connor pick, but one I didn't really know. It's A Letter to Three Wives, which I really, really think is such a just great classic film. And also, I highly recommend an episode of The Simpsons, which parodies the film, with Moe as the letter writer, and that's all I'll say.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Anthony. And Connor, for you, I think I'll go with Sorcerer. Sorcerer is a really fun movie, just highly original, kind of definitely of its time, doesn't take itself too seriously, and kind of offbeat. And I think your choices overall usually reflect that to some degree. You kind of like to go on tangents and unearth some hidden treasures. So that's my choice. Connor, any reflections?
Any reflections? No, we've had so many. I've had so many great movies, so I was ready to reflect. I'm glad you guys picked a couple different flavors of Connor classics. I like to bring them out of the vault. Yeah, and I definitely appreciate Letter to Three Wives being called out, because that is one of my all-time favorites. And it was just a blast to watch it with you guys. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Connor. All right. So now we'll go to the brooding kind of front man, at least on the Teen Bop magazines. That's Anthony. We'll start with you, Connor. Give us a choice for Anthony.
This one was actually pretty easy, but I have to go back a ways. I think my favorite of this batch of Anthony's, obviously there were lots of greats, and we had, like, for instance, we had, Citizen Kane, we had Blade Runner. Obviously, we had like these stone cold classics that I love. But I'm going to pick for a sort of a movie that affected me and got me excited. I'm going to pick Virgin Suicides. That movie, really on this watch, I don't think I'd seen it before, but just watching it, I think watching it for this podcast, with my thinking cap on, it just really revealed a lot to me. That movie really did speak to me. It was a great pick by Anthony, and I know it's reaching back away.
Let's cut. Connor, that's my movie.
That was your movie?
That was a Lennon McCartney move with A Day in the Life.
Oh shit! Okay, I'm sorry.
I carried that episode, but
wait, let's regroup. Tony's a great editor, so we can
okay. No, it should be known. I'm sorry.
No, I think we got to keep it. I think we got to.
Keep it.
All right. Connor, what Anthony movie jumped out to you?
Obviously, it was very easy to pick for Anthony. That would be Citizen Kane. Who can fault him for the classics? Sorry, guys, my bad.
We're little podcast hijinks here. Okay, and Tony, did you give an Anthony movie? I don't think you did.
No, and my pick would be this one is going back a ways. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was one that I just felt very excited when I watched it. It really just activated me. It got me going. It was just I watched it as a kid, and I only seen like half of it as a kid. I never watched it all the way through, but what a great find. I mean, not a find, it's like a classic, but for me it was a great find. I thought it had amazing tension, amazing atmosphere, amazing direction and acting, and I was just so engaged and so enthralled and plugged in, and it just electrified by that movie. And the way I was with what's the one he did in the last batch? The Beguiled. It was kind of the same feeling I got from that movie. So
yeah, it's interesting. Another question we could have tackled is best individual performances of these 50 or 49 films, and I think Donald Sutherland's performance in that movie would be up there for me, definitely. So for Anthony, I'll go with Y Tu Mama Tambien. I think it's a movie I kind of was a little harsh towards. If I recall correctly, I thought the sex was a little gratuitous, and it didn't really have much of a point in my eyes. But I think just it evokes a certain array of emotions and images that have stuck with me over the years for some reason. And also, it's our most popular episode. So there's something there, not at all due to the lurid description in the YouTube video, but because it's great. It's actually approaching Mr. Beast's Squid Games, so we'll see. We might be able to surpass him. But okay, Anthony, any reflections?
I think I swung for the fences quite a bit in the SAF. My Stokers, my Roger Rabbits, my Fright Nights didn't always quite land. No regrets on those. But I think good selections, and I'm glad to see taste and kind of opinion sort of change for the more positive with something like Y Tu Mama. And I'm glad to see Invasion of the Body Snatchers hang around and have a kind of lasting effect in your thoughts, because that's a movie I turn to quite a bit in my own head. So.
Yeah, great. Well, we certainly appreciate getting a glimpse into the psychology of your taste and your essence, Anthony. But why don't you go ahead and lay one on us for me?
Yeah, this was tough. Usually I feel like Kirk movies are visceral experiences that he's kind of latching on to something for an emotional and a kind of gut reaction, or a nostalgic one, a Titanic or something. So it's kind of rare. And, Kirk dives into the canon, he dives into the past, but it's kind of rare for him to offer something from yesteryear. And I think A Place in the Sun is one of the more interesting episodes we've ever done. Not because we disagreed on the movie, but because of the conversation we had. And so that conversation made that movie much more interesting than I probably would have had watching it on my own. or watching it in the silence of like a movie theater. So A Place in the Sun would probably be my favorite, with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor delivering a performance that made me realize why Elizabeth Taylor was Elizabeth Taylor at that time.
Yep. The what is that? The lakeside scene? That was great. It's a great movie. And the poor wife. I mean, really, geez. So let's go to Connor.
Well, it's funny you mentioned. Okay, I think I would change. It was tough for Kirk. I had some picks. Obviously, I think I'm not sure. Can I dethrone? Would I dethrone to give him Virgin Suicides with that dethrone his others? I'm not sure if I should. I mean, obviously, Virgin Suicides is uniquely. I think this was a great episode, and I just had a great reaction to that movie. But I think I'm gonna have to give it to Sound of Metal, which was you, right, Kirk?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, one of my favorite movies of the last.
Beautiful movie. Like that was just a great pick, and
Yeah, I almost picked that one.
Thanks, Connor. I'm glad that's represented. Tony.
Yeah, so my favorite from Kirk was Hoop Dreams. Basketball documentary, classic. That movie just drew me in. It's about 3 hours long and it just flew by. I just felt so immersed in the world it depicted and felt so invested in the characters and or I shouldn't call them characters, they're real human beings. Just an incredible documentary that had been on my radar for a long time, but I'd never actually seen until Kirk brought it up for the podcast. And I'm very grateful that he did, because it's a movie that I regularly will like tell people out and recommend if they haven't seen it.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I think we got love, we got music, and we got sports represented. That's okay in my book. Thank you for the nods. And I'm gonna lay this one on you very briefly. A question for each of you, but a movie that, and you may not remember the last 50 episodes or 49 picks comprehensively, but a nomination that you put forth that wasn't chosen, that you are the most bitter or frustrated or saddened by. And I can go first. I believe this was in the COVID years. I want to say right after we kind of revived, maybe like around the Invasion of the Body Snatchers episode, but Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser, Alicia Silverstone, Sissy Spacek, Christopher Walken. Such a great rom-com from the, I believe, early 2000s. Really funny, just incredibly incisive, and a great critique of, kind of both the juxtaposition between what was then modern and then 50s kind of idyllic nuclear family relations. I think it's a really fascinating film. Very funny, very funny. Yeah, I wish we had watched it, but there's always chances in the future, so it might be recommended again. Anyways, I'm gonna put one of you on the spot. Anthony.
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, my instinct is to say is I don't remember exactly what film I nominated from him, but Pedro Almodovar is someone we still haven't covered. And I know I've nominated him quite a few times. Another one that specifically jumps out is Open Your Eyes, a Spanish film I nominated, I think, twice. Maybe not, maybe just once. But I think the kind of sci-fi experimental thriller would have been a great choice. And maybe I'll get back to it down the road and someone will select it. I'll also say I think I wish at times, I don't remember who picked it, but I wish we did The Two Towers when Kirk nominated it. That would have been fun. But I think we did E2 Mama instead.
It was Return of the King he pitched.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Return of the King, yeah.
Though Two Towers might actually be a better episode. I don't know. Return of the King is just, there's too much, not upon reflection. But anyways, good choice, Anthony. Connor, do you have one?
Yeah, I mean, it may be a little boring because I'm sure I'm going to recommend it again. Yeah, I think there's some you feel like, I feel like I'm trying to think of one that would be like, I recommended it and its time has passed. I would never recommend it again, that we had to have watched it at the time. I can't quite think of one right now. But I would say like a kind of a total like classic, a one that I really would hold up very high in my like canon that we haven't watched would be The Apartment. Billy Wilder's The Apartment. But yeah, I feel like we're coming. I was thinking about it just recently, kind of coming around to. I feel like the season to watch The Apartment. But I'm sure it'll make another appearance. But that'll just be my little plug for now. Hopefully, someone will take the hint here.
Connor, well, when you're talking about things that are no longer in favor, I mean, you nominated "I Love You, Daddy," but granted, you did that like 4 years after he was canceled. So I don't know. Maybe that's in your favor, but not in
now I think you're mixing up, Kirk. I think you're the one who's thinking. I know whose pick that was, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Tony, go ahead, finish us off here.
Yeah, so the two that come to mind are All About Lily Shushu, which I think I pitched twice. Just a really beautiful, fascinating Japanese film from the turn of the millennium about music and fandom and the internet. Coming of age movie that I really responded to. I was very excited to do it. I still hope we do it. And the other one is Brawl in Cell Block 99 by S. Craig Zahler. Really brutal, really violent movie, drenched in atmosphere. I'm dying to do that or Dragged Across Concrete. But again, I'm sure we'll have our chance for one or both of those. The other thing, just in general, is how have we not done a Stanley Kubrick movie? I've probably pitched every Kubrick movie at this point, at some point, and we still have not done one somehow.
I think the only one that's been nominated is
I pitched Barry Lyndon. I pitched The Shining. I've pitched.
I think I pitched Eyes Wide Shut at one point.
Yeah, I've pitched at least one more. But
someone do 2001.
I don't think it's ever ended.
Paths of Glory, I think. Paths of Glory I pitched at one point. But yeah.
He ripped off what's his name? Peter Berg, anyways, most of his stuff. So
that's what makes him brilliant.
Oh, I see.
That's gonna be my take. That's gonna be my 4D chess galaxy brain take on Kubrick.
My mistake. All right. Well, folks, if you've been along for the ride or part of the ride, you got car sick, you got off, you jump back on for the 100th. We're very happy to have you. And yeah, here's to another 100, right? Let's continue to build out this canon. I was actually thinking if we aggregated all of the IMDb scores for all 100 of our movies, what the average score would be. And, it'd probably be pretty high. I think generally we've been doing good movies, but there are a couple stinkers in there, intentional or otherwise. I wonder what Barney's Great Adventure is pulling on IMDb right now. But there's so many great movies, and we haven't even scratched the surface. I guess that's the take home point. We really want to keep exploring the world of cinema because there's always more to uncover. There's always more to unearth, and we can't wait to go along on that ride with you all. So now we will transition to the actual meat of this episode, which is a discussion of the pilot episode of Vinyl, 2016 prestige series to be that never was for HBO. I actually thought if we were going to venture into TV, we should have watched all 1,086 episodes of One Piece. But apparently, some of these other people have jobs, and we have to, there's time constraints. There's a lot of air quotes in there. But so we're going to talk about Vinyl, which is, it's actually a $30 million pilot episode. I wonder where that ranks. It'd be interesting to look that up. Most expensive pilot episodes in TV history. I'm sure maybe the new Lord of the Rings might be up there. Some other ones. If our crack research staff can get on that, just let me know. But so we want to discuss this, and it's a show that has some personal significance for me at a juncture where we're looking back. This was a show that came out in 2016. At the time, we were all still living together in Greenwich Hall in the West Village. And, I was still acclimating to New York City. I was still kind of adjusting to the vibe, to the tenor, to the pace, the pulse, the frequency of the city. And it certainly should be noted that Vinyl takes place in New York City, and so therefore there is some significance there for me. And I watched it and I kind of saw pieces of a city that no longer existed, right? That had been paved over and commercialized to death. But I also saw in Vinyl, kind of, when I watched it, I was exposed to a variety of kind of musical tastes, musical subgenres and artists that really kind of piqued my interest. And I saw that as closely aligning with my experience just being around you three. I was quite a insulated Midwestern kind of 20-something, moving out to the East Coast, a little naive, I'm sure. And kind of engaged in an intrapsychic renaissance, as it were, when I came out here, really challenged intellectually and, began to look at art with a more critical eye. And I thank you all for that. And I think this podcast is kind of a piece of that journey. And so Vinyl is also a piece of that journey for me. So it is something that has personal meaning to me. And I'm glad I could share at least the pilot episode with you all. And also, it's just been this running joke that the show I recommended so heartily was canceled after the first season, and Tony never let me live that down. Always cracking a joke about Vinyl, but yeah, I'm curious. I think that the goal of this discussion will be at the end to decide whether or not Vinyl should have been canceled. So let's keep that in mind as we're discussing. But yes, Vinyl 2016 period drama covers record label executive Richie Finestra, I believe, fictional character for American Century Records based in New York City, somebody who is spearheading a company that is failing, is basically a facade at this point, and he's trying to sell it to a group of Germans for a quick buyout before all of his illicit and kind of underhanded dealings are exposed in terms of forging charts and paying off DJs and artists and all these types of kind of seedy activities that you would expect from an HBO prestige drama like this, especially one that has such creative direction from Martin Scorsese. You definitely can see an overlap between this, Bobby Cannavale, who plays the Richie Finestra, his kind of archetypal anti-hero is very much on display in Bobby Cannavale's character. Also starring Olivia Wilde as Richie's wife. And let's see, there's some other great kind of character actors that are sprinkled in here. You have Juno Temple. You have Ray Romano, who's somebody who kind of withdrew from prominence after Everybody Loves Raymond, but he had a recent revival, I would say, and he's even got a show now. The name escapes me, but I think it takes place in Queens, so it's kind of going back to his roots, which you can really appreciate. And then you even have somebody like Andrew Dice Clay, right? Somebody who definitely the time had passed by, just an artifact of the 80s and 90s, and he got a role here in the pilot episode for Vinyl. But yeah, it's just it's a show that at least the pilot is 2 hours long. It's pretty much just nonstop, very very much information heavy, information overload. I think it's a benefit, or I guess kind of an asset of doing a serial drama where you don't have to flesh out every character in the first episode. You can really go into set the stage for various different explorations throughout the series, and I think they did that. Whereas if this were a movie, right, the 2 hours would have felt entirely different. The pacing would have been so much different. So I think it really benefited from that. But more generally, I will say this show was not exactly critically received in the greatest light. Folks, felt it was overly nostalgic, derivative, kind of, just hawking on themes and motifs that should have been buried by now. I'm sure, some of you may agree with that, but let's look at this from, a technical aspect. Let's look at this from a thematic aspect, and let's really jump in. So I'm gonna go with Anthony first. Anthony, give us your first impressions of the pilot episode of Vinyl.
Yeah, there's there's like that like cliche expression that like everyone who went to see like the Velvet Underground went home and started a band. The New York Dolls are one of those bands that like people sometimes like substitute in place or in lieu of the Velvet Underground in that expression. And I think in watching the pilot, I had a problem in that when I see the bands themselves perform, none of that excitement to me gets transported. As in, when I see a real band or an actor's playing the real band, like the New York Dolls on stage or Led Zeppelin later on, it just feels so hollow. Like I can't imagine being in that crowd and being excited for this that much. And then at the same time, when I hear like the kind of music for the show, I just can't imagine it ever being transported into a hit for the time. I'm speaking about Lester's song, Lester being this kind of musician who's kind of faulted into a kind of corrupt position to sing for the record company and then ultimately like defeated by it in a kind of cliche story. But I say all this to get to the point of, I think the problem with vinyl is that on one hand, it is kind of a nostalgic mess. It's the kind of nostalgia for this New York that none of us got to experience, but we all still like wish we kind of lived through. And at the same time, it doesn't actually seem that exciting to want to live it because it feels so hollow. It feels so stagey. I don't actually ever believe Olivia Wilde was like a Warhol factory girl. I just feel like it's the Twitter meme of someone who saw an iPhone face on that screen. I see actors at times. I see a kind of dressed up like set of New York that doesn't feel real to the kind of world I would imagine for the time. And I never even get any of the griminess. I never get any of the sense of fear or danger I feel like should exist in wanting to kind of recapitulate that era. And I say this because I feel like I'm watching a very expensive stage production play out over the 2 hours. I get none of the thrill of kind of Scorsese's direction. The voiceover for some reason disappears unless I missed it or unless it was bad on my stream. I think Bobby Carnival has a great face for it. I don't think their story kind of has more juice that I think if you're going to take a fictional take on the music industry, you should give it. I think we've seen the kind of drug rattled executives before. I think I wanted something more human and more grounded, less so about these kind of players and more just about the city itself, which is truly the most exciting character, I think, in the show. And I feel kind of scattered, but I think that's because the show or the pilot itself has a kind of scatteredness to it. And maybe that's it. And maybe I could say more in just a second.
All right. That's a fair critique, Anthony. Definitely some valid points were raised. Let's see if we'll build that in that direction or if Connor will go a different route. Connor, go ahead.
Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, I mean it's tough. I think for me, like a show is always like a hard sell. It's like I love the medium of film with its like economy. Obviously, when you think about it, it's like, stories can be told over like there's no reason why we have to restrict a story to like 2 hours or well, obviously Scorsese can go a lot longer, but obviously there's what's the issue with right a longer story. And here I think it was interesting. I mean, we took a lot more time to like set up what's going on. We have this sort of ticking clock of, we know everything is going to fall apart. Then we also have this thing of this murder that occurs, or a self-defense killing, which adds a lot of drama towards the end of the episode. And then I kind of wonder, like, okay, like, what is this really about? And I have no idea, like, what else is going to happen in this show? And I think, like, what I was very captivated by was interesting. I mean, I think what I really took away from this, I think maybe Anthony is feeling a similar thing, the kind of the fakeness, the kind of the, but I think to me, this almost feels intentional. The New York of the 70s does seem kind of horrible. I mean, there's something like the music they're interested in. I don't know, like to me, it has an element of like a nostalgia, even for an earlier time, even though you can't necessarily be nostalgic for the 60s either, because we sort of flash back to the 60s several times in the show as in this episode, as we learn more about Richie's background. I was fascinated by, of course, I love the music. All of the music that appears in this episode, just for example, is incredible. And really, he does spend a lot of time giving the music like time to breathe, and the kind of ghostly presence of the music that kind of brings back this past to him. I thought that was very, very cool. Then again, with this episode, it's like there's so much in it. There's so much to say about this time and about what's going on in music. Like, I'm not sure I got all of the threads that I wanted, to follow. I think we spent too much time with these like very unlikable record execs, which of course are supposed to be unlikable, and that's kind of the point. But like, when we're thinking about all these musicians that were playing at the time, and what is the music scene in New York at the time, and also what is the music scene in New York, 10 years earlier, that too, is all really interesting. But I feel like, it doesn't follow some of those threads that I wanted it to follow. But yeah, I mean, I thought still the Scorsese did come through sometimes in a way that's a little bit like, it almost feels like on the nose, like he's doing an impression of himself with like the very opening introduction of like, here's my right hand man. I'm like, that's like, it's like, I don't know. But those are gripes. But I think overall there's something very, very compelling about it. I just think like, I just like to answer this question of like, why did it have to be 2 hours? And what did we learn? I think there may be a case to be made for it, but it's like that. I don't know whether I wanted this murder to happen earlier, so we have something kind of driving more of the plot when there's already other things we can be sort of we can feel tension about, we can feel the tension in obviously there's the record deal and the Zeppelin deal and all of that. So there's that is all going on. So we have something to kind of keep us watching, but then I think almost is it undercut by having that death at the end, but I guess you couldn't like set it up in the next episode anyway. So I think there's just a lot of questions of whether it was the optimal choice, but no, I found it very interesting. I think I wasn't completely sold in the execution, but I think it's a very interesting show, and I definitely want to watch more of it. But
all right, well, I'm glad to hear that, Connor. And what I will say before we get to Tony is, I do believe this season, which is the entirety of the series, does get better. There are some absolutely fantastic moments later on, and some directions that you would never have expected the plot to go. So if you are at all interested, I would highly recommend giving it the full ride. But Tony, go ahead. Let's hear your impressions.
All right. Yeah, I was kind of a mixed bag. There were things I liked, there were things I didn't like as much, but I will say this: I thought that for a 2 hour pilot, it moved remarkably brisk for me. Like, obviously, it's not paced like a feature film; it's paced like a TV pilot, and it's a little bit slow, and you have to introduce all the characters and set up all the storylines. You're not going to have everything resolved within the 2 hours the way you would in a movie. But I never found myself bored. I actually watched it twice, or more like 1.5 times, because bit of a digression here. There is no legal way to watch this show, which I think is a crime. It got pulled off HBO Max. I don't know if it was when they did their transition to Max or if it was earlier. I think it was. But it's a relatively recent show with like a pretty, big budget and quite a bit of talent behind it, quite a bit of pedigree. You have Martin Scorsese involved, and you can't even keep it on your streaming platform. Like, I know it wasn't a particularly successful show, but it feels a little bit like almost disrespectful. And it seems like bizarre that you have to like go way off the beaten path to find the show. So the initial stream I found had no audio for like the entire second half of the episode. So I watched it like that. And then I'm like, well, I guess that's that. But then later I was able to find it and actually watch it properly. But I found that like I really did not mind rewatching it because things are always happening. There's always new characters being introduced. There's always new plot lines being introduced. I think the pacing is good. I think the editing is good. I think that, yeah, Scorsese, it's not like it's not Goodfellas or Casino level filmmaking, but you see flashes of that kind of Scorsese panache, with some of kind of the camera moves, and we enter a location, and some of the scenes of violence have that kind of Scorsese grit that I know and love. There are sometimes when it feels like an impression of himself. I think the voiceover is not used particularly well. I mean, I like it. It's like slipping into a warm bath, but it just drops it and it makes it feel just kind of like an odd choice. I wish it was applied a little bit more consistently and a little bit more deliberately, which maybe that's more of a writing thing than a directing gripe. But yeah, but I think he did a good job making it very watchable. I think the visuals are very nice. You can tell they put a lot of money on it. I do agree with Anthony that it isn't quite as gritty as I would like. It feels a little bit like a costume party or like an impression of 70s New York rather than a window into that time, which, am I asking too much? But I don't know. I feel like with the amount of money they spent on it and the involvement of Martin Scorsese, I had a little bit higher expectations in terms of that feeling of grit, that feeling of authenticity that I don't think quite was there. Felt a little bit modern, a little bit polished for my liking, just aesthetically. But yeah, but I thought that I liked the characters for the most part. I thought the storyline with the blues musician whom Bobby Cannavale kind of signs early on in the flashbacks, while it is a bit of a cliched story, I thought it worked. I thought it worked well. I found myself emotionally drawn in by that actor and his performance, and I think they have good chemistry, and I think it's genuinely affecting. And then when it ends in that really dark way where he's getting roughed up by the new owners of the label, I think that was legitimately like upsetting to watch, and the way it was intended to be. Not all the characters I love, but Bobby Cannavale I think is great. I think he's perfectly cast. I think he's got the perfect look for a Scorsese like protagonist. I think he absolutely nails this character. There's no one else I can imagine in this role. I thought Ray Romano was delightful. Ray Romano was fantastic. He's got great. Obviously, he's a funny guy, but he's got great just charisma on screen and great chemistry with Cannavale and the other guys, and just a lot of great like character actors, a lot of like little people just showing up, like, oh hey, it's that guy or someone I've seen on other shows, which was kind of nice. Not all the characters I loved, like the one woman who's like I don't know what her role is. Is she a receptionist?
Juno Temple's
Yeah.
character. She's like an associate, like an assistant A&R person. Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't find her storyline in this episode where she's kind of finding the new band particularly compelling. I was kind of like, okay, we'll have to wait and see. And also this kind of murder, which is I'm assuming going to be hugely consequential to the plot and kind of the inciting incident of the larger story, to me felt like there's already enough else going on that I was engaged and invested. It almost felt like gilding the lily, or it felt like, oh, this is such a huge escalation in a way that I wasn't sure I liked. But again, obviously it's gonna, be consequential and play a big role in what happens going forward. So it feels premature for me to like judge it. I feel like I have to see how things develop to really judge it one way or the other as a plot turn. And oh yeah, and that whole scene with that character in his mansion felt like a bit of a ripoff of Boogie Nights with the Alfred Molina with the gun, and Mark Wahlberg. It felt like not as bad of a ripoff as in Babylon. Babylon just takes that exact scene and plays it out like verbatim, but still a bit. I definitely noticed it, so that was a little distracting. But in general, I would say that I liked it. I would say I liked it. I'm intrigued to watch more. And most of my gripes, well, I have some gripes with the actual script, of course, but my biggest gripe is with HBO for not having a better way for me to watch this show and not giving my computer a virus.
You don't like those pop-ups? I thought they were tailored
I enjoyed those.
to a
But
certain audience. Anyways, we'll gloss over the pop-ups, but thank you all for your contributions to this discussion thus far. I really think you all bring up valid points. I was actually expecting, once Anthony went, I was expecting there to be a little more negativity across the board. So it's nice to see it kind of balanced out, and not to say that Anthony, you're just being negative for the sake. I think you bring up valid criticisms of of the show, and Tony, you kind of harped on that again. I do wonder though if that's just kind of that's a reflection of where we are in the TV landscape. I mean, was The Sopranos gritty? I don't know. Was Boardwalk Empire gritty? When I think of gritty and HBO, I think of things like True Detective, and what is it, Treme, or I forget how you pronounce it, but some things that really do feel have a certain mimetic quality, but otherwise there's a lot of kind of that Hollywood gloss, and kind of that, there's like this tongue-in-cheek aspect that, the writers are always talking to, obviously The Wire. Okay. I cede my point with The Wire. The Wire is essentially very gritty, but some of the other HBO shows, it does feel very much like, the world is only existing for our viewing, if that makes any sense, right? Like we're just there. It only exists for us. And once we leave, once we dismiss it, it ceases to exist. And, I wonder a little bit about that kind of symptom pervading this show, but, and TV as a medium, but I don't know. There's some really interesting ways we could go. I think, I would like to know what your experiences were with the music. There was so much music packed into this single episode. Even I feel like there was always something going on in the background, except for the first scene, which was intentionally bare, right when he's purchasing the coke and he's relapsing, and then he goes in and sees the dolls. But for the rest of the 2 hours, there's always something playing on in the background. There's these really kind of interesting cutaways or like interludes with some artists that, was that supposed to be Aretha? I don't know who that one artist was supposed to be with the tambourine, and then Bo Diddley and some other people. But, what was your impression? Like, and I guess this speaks to a larger thing. Like, there's so many musical references in here, and so many of them went over my head initially, and they still do, right? I kind of went down some avenues, right? Did some investigating back in 2016, but is this show just too much of its time? All of the cultural references and artifacts are too dated for a large proportion of HBO's viewing audience to really find any resonance in, or any semblance of, connectedness to. I wonder if that kind of ultimately played into the fact that this was canceled. And then to kind of tease that point out further, does this show just exist for a certain demographic, say somebody who in 2016 was between 55 and 75, right? White male, keyed into popular music throughout the 60s and 70s, right? What are your thoughts on that? Is the audience kind of already filtered down to an unsustainable level based off the fact that the music is at once esoteric and quite dated, but also by the fact that this is a show that relies on those cultural cues so very much, and it kind of requires you to have an appreciation for the music of the time? Or do you think that that's kind of rather immaterial? It doesn't matter what music's playing. It doesn't matter what artists are in the show. There are obviously some headliners. There are some bigger artists that are mentioned or seen. We see Zeppelin. We hear about Iggy Pop. We hear about Lou Reed, Andy Warhol, obviously not a musician, but a lot of kind of iconoclasts who have kind of stood the test of time. But at the same time, there are these smaller bands. I don't know how many 22-year-olds in 2016 were really tuned into Donny Osmond. I only knew of Donny Osmond because of my dad, who owns like 1,500 records or something of the sort, and has them all cataloged. So I benefited from that. But right? Like there are these artists and then these jokes that require the foresight of understanding a little bit about the culture and the age and the artist. So anyways, long rant there, but if anyone wants to jump in on any of those talking points, I'd love to get a discussion going.
Well, I'm kind of curious about like the timing of the show and what you're saying, Kirk. The way I think about it is like, on one hand, the show, ignoring its kind of what it's allowed to get away with on HBO, I suppose, feels kind of like a hallmark to like a kind of like all-star cast of like not quite A-listers, but not quite like C-listers, you know, these kind of middle of the road actors or up and coming ones thrown together for a mini series kind of vibe. Because we're in the era post Sopranos, we're actually in the era where Mad Men's just about to end, which I'm thinking is kind of already offering a nostalgic or a view of the 60s filtered through our modern day lens at the time. We're in a kind of Game of Thrones world on HBO. So what kind of New York are we all of a sudden expecting for vinyl to give us? And by the way, we're 3 years after Inside Llewyn Davis, which gives us probably a more emotionally realistic version of New York, at the least, of an artist trying to make it. And in terms of vinyl's pilot and the music, with everything it has going for it, the reason I bring that up is like, I'd imagine creatively the executives at HBO thought they were going to be appealing to kind of a baby boomer, Gen X, maybe older Gen X, who is nostalgic for this time period, who maybe lived through it or maybe wanted to, could have at the time, maybe they were old enough or just young enough and missed it. But realistically, I would imagine people like us would have been the ones who would have turned out for the show, who would have had an interest in kind of recovering this kind of archive of music, of going on to Spotify immediately after and searching every song out. But I don't know. I mean, to me, the music was maybe a little esoteric, but it wasn't totally unfamiliar. Maybe the references were a bit more unknown to me. Sorry, I think I saw Connor's thing. I don't know if I cut it in.
No, Kirk, did you want to address what Anthony was saying?
Well, I'm scrolling some of the artists here, and by the way, the front man for the Nasty Bits is what's his name? It's Mick Jagger's son. I don't know if you all knew that or saw that in the credits. Mick Jagger's like the lead musical producer of this show and also an executive producer. But anyways, I'll get back to my point. Go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting. Yeah, I don't think in principle, obviously, because like white men of that age, are kind of a lot of the culture is kind of geared to them, especially as HBO in general. I feel like maybe kind of leans in that direction, and sadly, it kind of, I think a lot of the pop culture kind of flows down from that, and I still think people would still be interested. I don't think it kills the show, that it's geared towards the boomers, and slightly older maybe even than your average boomer, but no, I mean, what's interesting about it, like obviously, like we should have lots of references to acts that we don't know anymore. I mean, I think it wouldn't feel right if they were just name dropping things we know are big. I mean, there's the one kind of corny ABBA bit where they're like, like that, this will never catch on, and then he says, I can tell from just hearing that for 15 seconds, first 3 bars, I know it's going to fill stadiums, that kind of thing. So, but of course, that's the fun of it, is like the things they think are big that we don't know about anymore, the things that they don't think are big that do become big, obviously. But I think what's really kind of like I think we're almost missing in this. I think it's just very marked that maybe this changes throughout the show. Kirk, maybe you can clue me in, but it's like the fact that to me the music not of the 70s is what's so prominently featured. I mean, there's obviously there is some with the Dolls, but like at the beginning. But like the fact that it's like mostly kind of what appears, I think, to Richie, right? The things that he's kind of thinking about, right, are these Black artists of the early 60s and late 50s, and this kind of early rock and roll and R&B and blues that seems to like kind of be the music that really speaks to him. And it's interesting because I know Scorsese himself is really interested in blues, and you can see a lot of like blues references in his earlier movies and stuff. So clearly, I think he's speaking a little bit from himself. Maybe this is kind of the music of his childhood, but it's kind of different because here we have a different character, a character who, you know, I don't know how old he would be now, but this man was probably born, you know,
I'd say probably like
older than Scorsese, you know, was at the time, right? So he represents, there is a kind of a generational shift or a kind of telescoping of not only were you seeing 1973, but we're also seeing 1963 or what have you. So like, I think there's something very important to that. Not that necessarily answers your question as to whether it hurt or helped it, but I think it's like, I don't think it is just a musical time capsule of the 70s, you know, it's about something kind of bigger than that.
Yeah, it's just when I think of something like Game of Thrones, right? Who possibly has the requisite references to I mean, it's fantasy, but it's based loosely on what, like medieval England, Britain. And so there are these guideposts, but at the same time, it feels so familiar. Whereas for this show, it was kind of jarring. It did feel very, and this is not to speak to the music, but just to the overall atmosphere. It felt quite exotic, right? It felt unfamiliar. It felt like extremely kind of vivid and ultra, fluorescent in a certain way. That I don't know. It just felt like a stark contrast to maybe some of the other things that HBO was releasing at the time. But anyways, Tony, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the music is good in terms of it gives the show a strong sense of identity. You know, the fact that the music is such a big part of the experience of watching the show. I do like and appreciate. I think the music is mostly like pretty good. I think that the who it's really for are people who were 13 in 2007 and would comment on like Pink Floyd or Steely Dan music videos. Man, kids in my class listen to Lil Wayne, Justin Bieber, who want to die. This is real music. That I think them, well, probably mainly for the boomers, but for them as well, absolutely. But no, I think what Counter said was very interesting though about kind of the two levels of nostalgia or sort of the like, I'm not sure quite what to make of that. What we're supposed to think of that. I mean, maybe there's something in it about the feeling of change or the feeling of the world kind of passing you by. And sort of, I do like Richie's sort of, the combination of kind of the cynicism and the sort of the idealism and the genuine love of music that clearly exists, but also the, obviously cynical and underhanded techniques he employs in his profession. And maybe the blues is supposed to be indicative of something pure and good, uncorrupted by this industry that he's become a part of. I don't know, maybe that's a cliche, but I think that's thematically what it's supposed to represent. But yeah, I don't know.
No, I was just going to say briefly, I think the show general, and you can see it at the end of this episode, and you can obviously see that the nasty bits are going to be a band that's their storyline's not at all resolved yet, and it kind of indicates a shift away from some of these arena rock bands, kind of the classic rock, towards some sort of formulation of punk with bands like Ramones and Dictators and the Dolls, of course. But anyways, Anthony, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say is I didn't realize this until all of you guys started speaking, and then when Connor brought up the blues and Tony brought up the extra layer of nostalgia for a kind of more innocent, more pure form of artistic expression in music. But I realized that in the setting of the show, all of these bands are nostalgic for a music in a time that's not their own. On one hand, we have Mick Jagger as the producer of the show and credited writer of the pilot, who, as we all famously know, the Rolling Stones are in love with Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry, kind of two iconoclastic figures. The New York Dolls, the very first band we see in the show, are forming as a rejection and a reaction to the kind of trends in rock music at the time. And in fact, they love nothing more than Bo Diddley. Led Zeppelin, of course, is going to be embracing the blues, but adding kind of electric tone to it, creating their kind of sound. And we hear throughout the rest of the show, not just so-called authentic blues and Lester's music, but kind of references to the kind of formation of things that are going to be going back to it. You brought up the Ramones, their love for Ritchie Valens' 1950s rock and roll, and the kind of incorporation of other forms of blues, not just the kind of black blues of the Delta that we more famously know. So I think there's kind of these interesting layers there, maybe within the show that I didn't consider until now. And I'll just say one last thing because I wanted to bring it up before I forget. The show did have me looking up references to buildings and locations, and that building collapse at the end of the episode, Mercer Art Center, I looked up, had the front entrance at 240 Mercer Street, which is today the NYU Law Dorm on Mercer Street. Just kind of a fun fact I just thought of, and I wanted to say before I forgot.
And the building did partially collapse. I'm not sure the extent of it, but that's based on a real thing. You bring up some great points, Anthony, just about the general trends and the currents that we can witness in this show, and then kind of forecast where the show might go. And I'm certainly not equipped enough to discuss the musical landscape of the 70s, the early 70s moving into the late 70s. And then you kind of dig into the second layer, which is, by region, by country, by age demographic, all these things and all the influences. But I think there's just a general sense that there are a variety of currents at the time, and music and the production of music is somewhat in flux. And we don't really, it's curious for someone who kind of considers themselves to be a layman for music at that time, at least rock music, to see where those currents are heading and, what the show can do with that from a dramatic perspective. And, I would say it definitely takes some turns that you might not expect, or you might see coming a mile away. But I do have one final topic to kind of, if we wanted to touch on. I know we're getting long on this episode. It is our 100th. You'll forgive us, but I'm curious about. This is the first time I believe this is the first time we've ever discussed a television show. Is that correct? Were any of the bonus bits about TV shows?
Last of Us.
Oh yeah, Last of Us. But that was more just in comparison to the game itself. I think this is we don't have a vinyl video game yet. I guess maybe Guitar Hero. No, I'm just kidding. But it's an interesting opportunity to kind of discuss. And I think Connor, you touched on it a little bit. Tony, you might have touched on it, but the pros and cons, or just how the media of TV and film really distinguish themselves, and what their strong suits are, and what their growth edges are. I'd be curious if anyone wants to kind of speak to that, or what they saw in this show that kind of either reinforce the fact that they do prefer dramatic representations in film over TV, or vice versa, or anything that kind of examines the two media side by side. I'd be curious if anyone had any thoughts. We have done 100 movies, probably watched over, I don't know, 250, 300 hours of movies for this podcast. And now we've watched 2 hours of TV. I guess, counting The Last of Us. And so, is it a neglected medium, right? Or is it the way of the future? And it's already here. And you look at all the streaming services, they all have their original series that they just kind of, they dish out, they mass produce, and they just throw into the world. And which ship is sinking, I guess, is the question. And is that a false dichotomy, perhaps? Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kirk. And I think you're not just talking about the artistic media, you're talking about the kind of the industry. And I think that we had, and I think that like HBO is like this incredible institution. And I think when people talk about like the golden age of television, they're talking about HBO in the 2000s, like with The Sopranos and The Wire and all those shows. And I think HBO still has a very strong brand identity, and a sort of like this sense of prestige that I don't think any other network really has still. There's a sense that they do things that other networks would not do. They kind of take more risks, and there's a sense of like prestige and importance associated with, I think, with HBO projects rather. If you have a book series you like and you want it adapted, the gold standard would be considered like an HBO miniseries or whatever. So that was very much born of the 2000s and kind of that brand they built over that decade. I think now we're in an era after that. The golden age of television with all these shows that we know and love, it's kind of over. Now we're in kind of the streaming era, which is like kind of an epilogue to that. Just not to say there aren't great streaming shows, there aren't great shows still being made, but I feel like that kind of we just have this glut of content now. And I think the future, what the way of the future is all we'll get is content in the streaming era. So the line between film and TV is basically going to go away because it's all just stuff you watch on Netflix now, basically. And that can be 8 hours, that can be 1 hour, whatever it is, you know, in whatever form. I think that, you know, we've already seen people debate things like Twin Peaks: The Return. I remember that year that came out, like a lot of people put it on their best movie of the year list, even though it objectively it's a television show, it's not a movie. But, you know, it kind of shows the porousness of that border and how and it's not really even about which one's better. I think they both have pros and cons. I think when I was in college, I would have said that television was better because you could be way longer and tell more complicated stories. But the benefit of film, as Connor said, is that focus. And that focus forces you to make certain artistic choices that you wouldn't in a TV show, right? There are things you can do in a 2 hour movie that you couldn't do in a 40-hour TV show because the medium is different. So that was a very rambling answer, but yeah.
No, it's kind of like schizogenic, right? Like there's this collapse of what, these two distinct things were. And now it's become this amorphous blob that we can access on demand. And it's really, really interesting. And I wonder what it means for the next 10, 15 years of visual art in America, I guess, and internationally. But Connor or Anthony?
Well, in some ways, though, Scorsese is a master of film, obviously. He's also a trailblazer of the content blob that will eventually be the only form of entertainment, which is, of course, The Irishman. People tell me Kills the Flower Moon is also very long. But that obviously, Irishman had this streaming, sort of like identity as well, that it was meant to be consumed in that way, right? I think there's something I dislike too about, maybe I prefer the filmic blob to the TV show where we have these false endings in the form of ends of episodes. I often get kind of like annoyed at the ends of episodes, like, oh, like they're just going to draw this out or this won't happen. I mean, obviously certain things are very episodic, but in terms of like a series, I often don't like how one episode will end and another will begin. Like, I would rather just a very, very long film or something like that. I don't know. I don't think the story was served in this case either, though I haven't seen the whole show, but I welcome the blob, is all I'll say. And I think Marty will give it to us.
It's interesting. I was reading an article about Netflix and the kind of the mass amount of cancellations they've had in the last 3 to 4 years of shows and how it's created this recursive thing where people are not tuning into new shows because they're worried about them being canceled and them having wasted time investing in stories that eventually won't be resolved. And then the new shows they release aren't getting viewership because people are worried that, and they'll get canceled. So it's like this recursive snake eating its tail. But Anthony, what are your thoughts?
I think Tony, probably put the distinctions, similarities, the kind of false dichotomy as best as I could say it. I think, like Connor, I think there's a power to the economy of a film if it can affect you and, deliver you from something in an hour and a half, 2 hours. I think that's truly remarkable. But at the same time, to defend TV a little, to do something across 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons that doesn't feel like you wasted your time during those, extended hours is also a powerful feeling. But I think it's very rarely done. So to get to Tony's point about the golden age or the great TV shows, I mean, if we're being honest, I don't have to repeat them here, but we're really only talking about a handful of shows that truly kind of rise above the pack. I don't know if we've had another one in a while. I thought Succession came close, but I don't think it quite reaches the pantheon of what would be seen as truly great TV. And in fact, if we're going on the HBO thing, actually, this is an interesting point. Someone made a very controversial, I think very in some ways, I kind of want to accept it that we actually haven't really had truly, truly great TV that's come out since like 2010, with a few exceptions of like David Lynch's Twin Peaks: The Return, True Detective season one, and most of like the first seasons of Game of Thrones. And they were like, since then, it's just been like a hogwash of like good and kind of like fairly remarkable, but not like above the watershed, so to speak. But anyway, thought that was a great talking point.
You clearly have not seen True Detective season 2.
I actually love
McAdams.
season 2.
We were thinking about talking about that as well. So many people were let down by that season, but it had its merits. I think TV, when it was its most successful, was in the 70s and 80s, right? Like when it was appointment viewing, and when the content actually kind of reflected more directly the lives of the people who were consuming it. You look at shows like All in the Family or The Jeffersons or MASH, right? Just these shows that really were kind of these very, very big tent poles of culture and a collective cultural identity that no longer exists, at least in terms of TV. So I don't know. There's a larger conversation to be had here, but for the sake of of time and for the fact that there's so many more conversations to be had in the years to come about so many different movies, we will go ahead and end here. Let's just ask this. Like I said at the beginning, we'll go around quickly. Did vinyl deserve to be canceled? From an artistic perspective, I know you could say, well, it didn't move the needle enough, as the executive said. But what are your thoughts, at least as it relates to the product? And I know you've only seen 1 of 10 episodes, so the question is kind of flawed to begin with. But I guess just give your impression on vinyl, in quite succinctly. Connor, go ahead.
Kirk, it was a victim of the Philistinism of the American. It should not have been canceled. I'm intrigued. I'm curious to see where it goes. I think, yes, it could have the danger of being a nostalgia project. Maybe if that's the critique people have of it, maybe that is true, and maybe that I would hope that would not be true as I watch it. But definitely intrigued to see more. I hope we get some characters that aren't just these record execs who I don't really like very much, but hopefully it'll expand a little bit. But I like Richie, obviously. I'm interested in him, as bad as he is, but.
Oh, I will tease you. There is a John and Oko cameo further on. Hope I'm not spoiling anything. I don't think I am.
All right.
If anything, I'm drawing you in. All right. Anthony, go ahead.
Without having seen the rest of the show, it is flawed. I was reading after we had watched, just doing some light research. The rumor was that Bret Easton Ellis and the guy who wrote Train Spotting were actually were in talks to be in the writer staff of season 2, which is always kind of like a funny kind of like gathering of like 90s all-stars to me. I would have liked to see where that went though. So what, maybe it deserved a season 2. Everything else got one this time. Yeah, that's it.
Fair enough. Yeah, they did fire. It was the beginning and the end when Terrence Winter was let go due to creative differences, the showrunner, and they brought on some new folks, and they just decided it wasn't worth the hassle to retool the show. So, Tony, go ahead.
Wait, Terrence Winter had creative differences with who? With HBO?
Yeah.
Really? That's kind of a bummer. Like, I thought they were pretty hands off about that kind of thing. I guess that's unfortunate. But I guess they were putting a lot of money into it, so it's not shocking. But anyway, no, I think that it's kind of a funny question. Like, I'm like, someone's gonna be like, it should have been canceled. I'm glad your favorite show was canceled, especially based on one episode. But no, especially after what Anthony said, like, I really want to see that hypothetical season 2 with Bret Easton Ellis in the writers' room. I mean, that could have been awesome, But yeah, no, I'm not saying no, it didn't deserve to be canceled. I'm intrigued to see more. And especially when you look at some of the stuff that's gotten 8, 9 seasons, it's hard to say they shouldn't have given the show a chance to bloom, because sometimes season 2s where good shows become great shows. So, yeah,
that's fair. Well, I'm encouraged today. My faith in humanity has been rekindled. And I know you're listening, HBO. I know you're taking this under advisement. Bring it back. Let Bobby Cannavale have his moment in the sun. I feel like this was his big break, right? Like just like Steve Buscemi's chance was Boardwalk Empire. Not that that amounted to much after, but both have had great careers, and I feel like Bobby earned it. Great actor, great presence, and we need this. We need a second season. So, anyways, folks, that's it. That's it for us today. We will be back with episode 101, official episode 101 of the 706 podcast, where we'll be discussing Frailty, Matthew McConaughey. What is it? Bill Paxton, I think. Yeah. Great film. And yes, please join us for the next century. And we'll be discussing. I don't know what we'll be discussing in episode 200. We don't even know yet. It might not even have been created. It's it's Martin Scorsese's 28th movie. So we'll be discussing that. But anyways, Anthony, take us away as you always do.
I'll have what she's having.